Hey everybody, it's Jeremiah. This is my Jesus story, and on the way to film this, I was trying to think of my first memory of God, of God's people or the church, and the first memory that I could think of was being in trouble and sitting in the pastor's office. And I don't remember what I had done. I was young. It was like 7 or 8 at the time. And I found myself in Pastor Dale Hummel's office. And I thought that I was just gonna get it. And he turned the tables on me and he said, young man, have you ever thought about going into ministry? Have you ever thought about being a pastor? And that caught me so off guard because up to that point, I'd only gone to church because my mom would bring mostly my sister and I there. And I think she brought us there, and me specifically, because she recognized a wildness in me and understood that because at the time my dad was getting some of his stuff together, and she recognized in me that I needed a very strong male presence, and in her mind, rightfully so, she thought, I wonder if I can find like strong male like presence at this church. So she would bring my sister and I, and like I wouldn't dislike it. I would go, but of course, I would find myself in the pastor's office. So when Pastor Dale said, "Hey, have you ever thought about maybe this as a calling?" It shook me a bit, and had never thought of myself anywhere close to God. I'd only imagined myself in other types of fields or lines of work, but that at least started the wheels turning, right? And looking back, I could see that was part of the trajectory that God put me on. One, in surrounding me with those strong men that my mom prayed for, right? And I have such a debt to guys like Pastor Dale and guys like Mark and guys like Tom, who for however and for whatever reason they recognized something in me, and consistently over the years they spoke into that and they shaped me. They might have put their hands on me back in those days where like that's what you did with knuckleheads like myself. But I knew that the place that they came from was love. So even though I might have resisted at the moment, I always received it. And growing up, a big part of that was growing up within the church, being surrounded by these awesome dudes who just loved me and began to fill a void that I didn't know that I had. And as I continued, I think like there's a term like just being slow cooked in the faith, and I think that was me. Like there wasn't ever one specific moment where like I just woke up and I saw God for like who he was as creator and savior. Rather, it was more like this chipping away, I think, at a very cold and calloused heart, a very angry heart, and just over the years chipping away, and through grace reminding me and showing me that he loved me, and loved me not just because he had to, this is a big part, but that he bought me with this price, and the price that he bought me with was supremely valuable. And as he began to thaw me out and chip away, I found myself in ministry And I think part of that is just the natural progression. I think if you hang around the church long enough, sometimes there are folks who are just like, well, he's here, and they recognized some sort of leadership potential in me, so they began to give me more and more responsibility. And I don't think it was necessarily because of my affection for God. I think it was because I was consistent and faithful, and I had a bit of leadership in me that they saw. So they were like, well, let's bring that kid in. And I remember like 19, 20, being brought into these leadership spaces of the church. And because of that, being exposed more and more to God's word, and being exposed to the beauty of it, and the richness of it, and how it described this God that I felt like I just barely knew. And I got to this point early on, like early 20s, where I had leadership responsibility, but not like, I feel like a real deep love for Jesus. And that changed when I was introduced to a family, specifically these two sisters and their mom, and Amanda and Paula Di Malherbe. Mom was and still is Teresa. And they came into our life and into our church, and I think more than anyone or anything else, showed me who Jesus was, both in how he comes alongside of people when they're struggling, but also just the beauty of his presence. And we first met Amanda when she came into our youth group, and we had heard that she suffered from it's a cruel disease called Batten's. And they noticed at first when she was a little one, and she began to go blind. And as the more that they did the tests, they recognized that it was more than just blindness, but that this disease would begin to slowly eat away at all of her facilities. So by the time she came into middle school, she was blind, and at that point, the life expectancy of someone with Batten's was 14, 15 years old. And as she came in, her younger sister, Paula, was also diagnosed. And I just remember going and feeling for these two girls. And sometimes, like, God puts people into your path that force you to stop and ask those questions that up to that point, because of like partly my privilege and just partly because I was protected from a lot of things, I think you just really have to struggle with the hard things of life. Like, God, these two beautiful souls, these sweet girls who have a wicked sense of humor and love Britney Spears, and like just innocent. Like, why? Yeah, like, why, God? And the more that you hang out with Amanda and Paula, the more that you love them. And you kind of step into that knowing sooner or later, this is going to be really, really hard. And also really struggling from that position. And as years went on, and as the disease progressed, I really learned who Jesus was by watching their mom take care of them. Single mom, one of the strongest, most powerful women I've ever met. and the way she loved her girls and refused to allow like this disease to get the better of them. She just fought and fought and fought and fought, and like Jesus over and over again would tell me, like, this is what love looks like, and this is what love, like a divine love, the kind of love that I have for you, and the kind of love that I'm calling you to have for other people. This is what that looks like. And just remember, like, those 10 years, almost 10 years, where I loved those girls. I watched Mama T, as we call her, watched her take care of them to the very end. And I think along the way, it forced me into those spaces where, like is God real, right? Because, like, if he's not, then okay, I got a whole other set of questions that revolve around Paula and Amanda and Teresa. But if you're real, God, you're gonna have to show me. You're gonna have to show me yourself. You're gonna have to show me who you are through this. And he did, like, consistently. And yeah, if you ever wonder, like, that's why I wear these two bracelets. One's for Paula, one's for Amanda. But I wear these bracelets to remind me, not just of them and the impact that the family has had on my life, but also as a reminder that, Jesus isn't this far off ideal, right? Like in those moments where it felt dark and hopeless, and you're given to despair and anger. They reminded me that he is indeed real, and he does indeed grow close to the brokenhearted. So that was really like part two, I think, of my faith, where part one was me being introduced to God. Part two, that whole section of walking through, like, this aspect of pain and heartache and death, like that's really where my faith had to take hold. Like, that's where, like, Jesus had to be real. And I think part three came in 3.5 years ago, where we always joke about my name, Jeremiah. It means that the Lord throws. And I was always like, that's just a weird name, and that makes, like, zero sense. Until, like, 3.5 years ago, where it felt like God was just like, hey, I'm about to throw you into something wild and crazy, so buckle up, son. And we had enjoyed these years of ministry up in the Bay, 15 years, and love the ministry, still love our people up there, and had gotten to this place where it just felt like God was calling us to something different. And it was really fuzzy as to where that was and what that looked like. And I got to this place where there were, like, a few things, a few options that we were praying about. And I remember this phone call that I got from my friend Noel Musicha. And up to that point, we had already been friends for almost 10 years. And we shared all these things in common. In fact, we met in Malawi and had remained friends and close friends ever since. And as I was trying to decipher what it was that God was calling our family to, this one fateful phone call, he said, I just stepped down from my position at the church. And I was like, what? That's crazy. And he explained that God was moving him to work with this largely immigrant community of Linda Vista, and he began to describe this community, and as he was describing, I began to like feel these things, and during the conversation he just said, why don't you consider moving down here? And I was like I got these chills, and I was like, oh, this is weird, because my parents just moved down to San Diego, and he's like, I'm not, in true Noel fashion, I'm not even going to touch it. Just pray into it. And I remember calling my wife, and I said, baby, I just, here's what I'm hearing. Like, tell me if I'm crazy. But almost immediately, she also knew that God was calling our family to come and to be a part of this church that looked specifically after those who are less fortunate, and to be birthed in this multicultural, multi-ethnic community of Linda Vista. And the more that I prayed through it, and the more that I talked to Noel, and then Rubes came into the mix, the more that it just felt like home. That, that same kid who sat in Pastor Dale's office, and him going, hey, have you ever thought about being a pastor? Because he saw something in me and understood that if I just took that anger and that energy and directed it into a fight worth fighting, that I would feel like my soul had found its place. And like Pastor Dale was right. Like here I am now, and it's still like this crazy, like looking back and seeing how God took this half white, half Asian kid who never really fit into hardly anything, and who had like all these issues and voids, and just said, my son, you're going to be part of this movement down in San Diego, and just wait till you see what I have in store for you. So every day I wake up and full of gratitude. But that's my Jesus story. Like you guys, it's still evolving. He's still writing it, but that's where I am now. Thank you.